to those who still want to keep Torah, the laws of Moses, the ordinances that were given on Mount Sinai from God to Moses, and then inscribed on clay tablets and brought to the children of Israel down at the base of the camp. The prophets of the Old Testament during the time of Israel's wanderings in the wilderness on their way to the land of promise, Canaan, where some of the giants still were, those of certain Canaanite tribes, whom they were to conquer under their general Joshua, Moses' protege. Are those commandments still applicable? Are they still required? The prophets of old pointed out that the nation of Israel and the general masses never really kept it, not fully. And if they tried to keep it, it was only partially kept. It wasn't fully kept. Of course, that's why they had to perform sacrifices to cover at those points where they failed. But even the apostles of Christ, and Christ himself pointed out to those who were under the covenant peoples, those who were under the Mosaic covenant, were never measured up to God's standards. Even those who were recognized as authorities on the laws of Moses, that they never even applied it fully for themselves, and that they were expecting everyone else to measure up to God's covenant, his agreement that he made with them several hundreds of years before that. But Jesus and the apostles pointed out that they never measured up, and that they were full of hypocrisy, wanting everyone else to measure up to the Mosaic law, but they themselves not even willing to lift a finger to help those others to measure up, and that they would travel to very great distances to win converts to Judaism. But when they did, they would make them twice the sons of hell as themselves. So that's why Paul goes into great detail about the superiority of the new covenant, which was predicted by their very prophets that they respected and honored. They did say that there would be another like Moses who would come and establish a new covenant, a covenant that wasn't written in stone, but covenants that were written on men's hearts. It was a covenant, a spiritual covenant. It wasn't just the letter. It was the spirit. And it was predicted by the prophets, the prophets of Israel. And that's why Christ held them accountable for knowing that there would be a new covenant established under a new priesthood, a new order. But apparently they missed it. That's why when Jesus entered Jerusalem, he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, thou which stonest the prophets," persecuting them, because they were telling them they weren't even living according to God's requirements. He said, "How long I've wanted to gather you underneath my wings, but you weren't willing." He was saying that they were never willing to be under God's wing. They continually sought to establish their own righteousness before God. It was a they masked it with they masked it up with putting on cosmetics, trying to make it look more than what it was, or be more than what it was. They tried to dress it up with their own works and their own traditions and their own interpretations of the scriptures, and making it more than what it was, more rigid, more legalistic, more burdensome. They had some very interesting traditions that made it really, really hard and loathsome to the general public. If they wanted to bring sacrifices, they would reject their sacrifices so they could sell their own sacrifice, their own pigeons or lambs or goats or bulls for a much higher price. They made it a scam. They ripped off their fellow countrymen. It was terrible. So, that a righteousness of their own, but it wasn't a righteousness. It wasn't God's righteousness. It was, they sought to establish their own righteousness before God, and God rejects righteousness that is not holy. And the only way to have holy, holy, holy righteousness is the new covenant, the blood covenant of Christ. Christ was able to be the perfect, righteous example of the Torah. Because Christ kept the Torah but he kept it on our behalf, being the perfect Adam. He became the perfect representative of man, and the perfect law keeper of Mosaic of Moses. So he measured up to God. That's why he was our perfect sacrifice.